Well, good afternoon. I'm so pleased to see you here in the digital world, and I hope that many of you from around the world haven't had any problems joining us today for what I think is one of the most important talks that my organization has ever presented. My name is Becky Lau. I'm the Executive Director for Archaeology Now, which is the Houston affiliate of the nationwide organization called the Archaeological Institute of America. And today I'm really proud to be here presenting a talk with Roxolana Makar talking about graffiti during wartime. This is part of a larger series that the Houston Society Archaeology Now is presenting this entire spring. This whole series is focused on the ancient history of Ukraine, and then it's also bringing it up in today because the tagline for our organization is that the past is never more present. And so we wanted to start at the very beginning of Ukrainian culture thousands of years ago, and then bring it up to today with a presentation like we're offering this afternoon. There's two more events on the series, which we hope for those who are able around the Houston area, able to join. The next one is going to be about preserving culture through cuisine, because all of the world meets at the table. And what a better place to meet and to undergo peacemaking than through food. So our next event is going to be about preserving borscht and pierogi. And one of the people that will be part of the presentation is an alumnus from World Central Kitchen, who is a Houston businessman that journeyed to Ukraine the very first week of the war, took the train to the Polish-Ukrainian border, and showed up at a World Central Kitchen facility and said, "Put me to work." You will hear incredible stories from him, and you will also have an opportunity to donate to World Central Kitchen, whose mission is very near and dear to our hearts. So, I hope you can stay in touch with Archaeology Now. Our YouTube channel contains stuff that we drop on a periodic basis, and then stay in touch on our website, archaeologynow.org. So, as I mentioned, today's event is about bringing history into the present and the ancient past into the present, because over thousands of years, humans have always left their mark. And graffiti is certainly perhaps one of the most accessible forms of communication. It's maybe one of the most egalitarian. This is how people can get around censorship. It's how they can get around, express their individuality, work to overcome tyranny, and then also sometimes express things that are not so pleasant. So today we will be talking about graffiti in Ukraine in wartime and how it expresses the feelings of Russians who are invading the country. And of course, one of the people that is at the forefront of this activity is Roxolana Makar, who's an art historian, a researcher, a writer, and a cultural heritage professional focused on law and accountability. She obtained her art history degree at the National Academy of Fine Arts and Architecture in Ukraine and a master's degree in cultural studies at the National University of Kyiv. Since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, she's been affiliated with the Ukrainian Heritage Monitoring Lab, where she is documenting damage of Ukrainian cultural heritage caused by Russian aggression. Her work is focused around using, adapting, and developing forensic heritage methodology in Ukraine in collaboration with international organizations. She also works as the content lead of the Wall Evidence Project, which today is heavily focused on. It's an open archive of Russian military graffiti in Ukraine. And before I turn it over to Roxolana, I also have to say this. It has been a great privilege to work with Ukrainian cultural groups in Houston, where there is a rather large Ukrainian immigrant population who have been coming to Houston since the beginning of war. And Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the US. And so I can think of no better place for them to be than here. So we're proud to work with the Ukrainian American Cultural Club of Houston and with the brand new Ukrainian consulate in Houston, and with the University of St. Thomas, which is doing incredible work helping Ukrainian groups adapt to Houston and develop a life here. So we're grateful to the opportunity of working with them. So now it's time to turn it over to Roxolana. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becky. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today, and thank you to everyone who was able to join me this afternoon or late evening in Ukraine. Yes, as Becky said, my initial background is art history and cultural studies, but since the full-scale invasion, I'm focused on the documentation of the consequences of this war in my country. So today I want to share with you the archive I've been gathering with my colleagues, and I will just open my presentation to show you what is happening in Ukraine. And like this presentation will be focused on the cultural aspect of graffiti and what it is telling about the war, but also it will be about the transformation of space of Ukrainian cities, of public space and also private space. This talk will not be easy because it concerns lots of heavy topics, obviously. So just be prepared and to set like the mood of what it will be about. I will be showing you like one of the I think most striking graffitis we have found so far. It says it doesn't count as a war crime if you had fun, and it was written in a bar by the Russian military in the occupied Kharkiv region. And this this graffiti and this message has lots of meanings for us as historians and as Ukrainians as well. First of all, because it says lots to us about the mood and the attitude of lots of Russian military who are participating in this conflict. But also it says a lot to us because it's an actual internet meme in Russia that has been popular even before the full-scale invasion in Ukraine. So this says a lot about culture, popular culture, and how it is intertwined with propaganda, with war and actual aggression, and how it actually leads to some real action when it starts as a joke in the internet and then leads to actual like war crimes that have been committed in this particular village, for example. But I will start from the beginning, and I will tell you a story about the occupation of Ukraine and how it was reflected in the graffiti. So here you can see the suburbs of Kiev, actually. Just so you understand, from where I'm sitting right now, it takes 15 to 20 minutes to come there, like to Bucha, for example, which is a very famous Kiev suburb, because during the occupation of this region, there were large war crimes committed there and mass killings of civilians. So the occupation and these war crimes were very, very close to where I live right now. This occupation was very fast and very scary, to be honest. And then while it lasted for a month, when we did not have like so much information about what was happening in the occupied territories near Kiev, uh, eventually these territories started to be liberated. First Kiev region, then some other regions on the north and east of Ukraine, then the south. And when we first came to these suburbs of Kiev, we just saw this kind of picture with lots of ruins, with lots of people just injured or dead or missing, and then lots of graffiti that just initially was aimed to um, redefine the space of the city to make it more comfortable for Russians to occupy. So, for instance, they were blocking the roads to civilians, as you can see on this picture. Or, for example, making restricted areas inside of some civilian infrastructure where they just uh, threatened civilians to come in. Um, or they just made some handmade signs like this from part of the car when they just restricted the civilian movement. So, and this redefinition of the territory was initially very like scary but interesting to us because when the you imagine the military action, you can imagine like trenches, you can imagine some areas that are occupied by the military, but during the occupation, this space becomes like the school becomes a base, the roads become the trenches and so on and so forth. So actual like civilian homes became military targets, and this space that people used to live in never becomes the same. Then we started to see some more scary pictures because, for instance, in like early April, when the Easter in Ukraine in 2022 was celebrated, this kind of pictures, graffitis started to come up. And the more we've seen these deoccupied, liberated spaces, the more actual graffitis and inscriptions we've seen. And we started to realize that it was actually a pattern and not some random people leaving some inscriptions, that these inscriptions are many and many. So by the point, we gathered around 100 inscriptions from different regions of Ukraine. We realized that we must publish this and we must publish these messages that was left. And this, of course, was prepared when all the war crimes that were uncovered near our cities uh, just was very emotionally hard for us to digest. And so these messages only deepened our pain. And we decided that this must be public. So then we uh, published this archive. It's alive, it's online, and it's accessible for all. and we called it wall evidence. So we came up with this name because we also wanted to show like the true attitude and evidence of like who did commit all these actions. In contrast of what the Russian propaganda says about staging them. Uh, so uh, these kind of inscriptions in the ruined territories of the Ukrainian suburbs, cities, villages have lots of themes and patterns that we started to recognize. And one of them was, of course, like marking the territory as Russian. And this one we can see throughout like all the liberated areas of Ukraine. So for instance, like this, like the farm that was marked as Russia by the military who was there and then almost completely ruined. Or like this one in Sumu region, where like the occupying forces decided to mark it as Russian in some like idle way to claim this territory. And of course, the Russian world or the Russian peace, which is a very interesting and disturbing concept of the modern day propaganda. Um, the in the Russian language, peace and world is the one word mir. So when you say Ruski mir, you can say Russian world or Russian peace. And this is one of the main concepts of Russian like state ideology that is projected by the Russian military throughout the world, not only in Ukraine. So for the Russian propaganda and Russian political forces, like to spread the Russian world or Russian peace, is to influence as many territories as they possibly can. And also lots of inscriptions and just public images and messages can say, for example, we need peace or world, preferably all of it. So for them, like this peace is also about conquering and not sustaining some just peaceful life. The other pattern we discovered was the USSR and World War II, which is for the Russians is called Great Patriotic War. And this like USSR nostalgia, communist utopia is very common for the Russian military who come to Ukraine because the World War II memory is really vivid in the Russian propaganda. And lots of the Russian military see themselves as the descendants of the Soviet military who won the Second World War. In the Russian propaganda, they won this war by themselves. And here we can see lots of these inscriptions that glorify USSR and the Second World War or Red Army, like on these fence of someone's ruined house. And here there is a very interesting historical parallel, actually, because we found out that it was a Soviet tradition also to leave the inscriptions. Namely, some of them are still preserved in Berlin on the Reichstag wall when the Soviet military came to the city. One of the messages we have discovered are like apologies or just excuses for invading the Ukrainian territories. And here there is some distinctions because indeed during some first weeks, I guess, of the invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, we have seen lots of like young men who claim that they didn't know why they are coming here, and they were tricked that they are going to some training, and then they just found out that they are in Ukraine. This kind of confusing state was also uh, just reflected on some of these inscriptions, but also there are lots of like ironic apologies. For example, it's not us, it's life, which is a very common Russian saying. And also like sorry, it's war, and like some attempts to avoid responsibility for their actions. Another pattern on the streets we have found was the ethnic minorities of Russia, which are many. And for example, it's Chechens that have a very problematic history. It is like actually an occupied nation that Russia invaded some time ago, and also, for example, Dagestani, who are also having a very conflicting history with like the Russians of the metropole. So while these ethnic minorities have lots of conflicts and problems with the Russian government inside Russia, they are unified by this common enemy of like fascist Ukrainians and other versions of what the enemy in Ukraine actually is, in order to sustain them in some relative peace inside the country. While they are just expressing themselves on Ukrainian walls, lots of their compatriots inside Russia have lots of problems with the Russian government itself. So this is a very interesting like political topic. While also there are some talks about how uh, really lots of the Russian mobilized soldiers are actually non-white people of Russia, Buryats, Dagestani, Chechens, Ingushetis, so like all these nations who are sent, who are prioritized to go to this war, which is actually not theirs because it's thousands of kilometers from Ukraine. And now I will tell you about some interiors actually, and some spaces that were occupied and how it was reflected on these walls. And I will start with Chernobyl exclusion zone. So like I suppose you all have heard about Chernobyl nuclear plants, and April 26 actually was the anniversary of the Chernobyl tragedy. We still have this exclusion zone that is restricted to people and which is radioactive and unsafe to be inside. And during the first stage of occupation, the Russian military actually occupied the plant itself. Well, the plant is not working, but there are scientists who are working there to sustain the radiation inside. So it is very crucial, actually, that the plant works correctly. So this radiation that stays inside the plant does not leak. And the Russian military occupied the plant and kept hostage the personnel for months. And then due to the heavy shelling, the electricity was off, and there was a real risk of leaking of the radiation because the power plant was not working correctly, and it took lots of efforts from the local scientists and personnel to sustain the power plant safe. Also, when the exclusion zone was created, lots of efforts were put to hide the radioactive remnants. So, for example, the contaminated houses, trees, all were buried underground, so they cannot project this radiation. And what the Russian military did, they started to dig trenches in the exclusion zone, just releasing this radiation back to the air. This is another example of the redefining the space. So what was the post office in Mariupol, which is still occupied, unfortunately, became a morgue because there were like many bodies that the morgues actually could not sustain. So they started to use other spaces like a post office that wasn't needed anymore in the city. And that's just another example how this space is redefined in the city that actually will not be the same. And the very big chunk of the spaces that were and are being occupied by the Russian military are the schools. And that's a very specific topic, actually, because schools are meant to be protected by international law, not to be occupied by any military forces. But the schools are actually the first thing that the Russian military occupy in every city or village, because this is a large enough space to accommodate all the soldiers or part of soldiers. And so most frequently these schools are being looted. Also, like they can be mined, for example, and we can see lots of inscriptions on the blackboards, on the walls, and so on. So, and fairly often the soldiers trying to address the children, like try to convey some messages to them as to like some future Ukrainians who they hope will grow up to be Russians or bear Russian culture. So here is one of these messages that conveys two major like narratives of the Russian propaganda. So it's like the brotherly nation, which is like Ukrainians and Russians, which is a myth that is being widespread throughout. Like there are two or three brothers, like brother nation, Ukrainian, Belarus, and Russia. And also the fascism in Ukraine, which is like also another myth the Russian propaganda tries to spread around the world, although no far-right party ever won the election to the parliament in Ukraine. And also there's this inscription, polite people, that is the like some local meme that the Russians uh, just found out when they were occupying Crimea in 2014. So they despite committing all the atrocities and military aggression, they refer to themselves as polite people. Here's another example of the school writing, and it's about like that schools is where Ukrainian orcs are born, obviously referring to the Lord of the Rings universe. It is widely popular to address the Lord of the Rings universe in Ukraine. where Ukraine, obviously, in our perspective, is the light side, and the Russians are the orcs. But here they are reversing this perspective and calling Ukrainian kids the orcs. And here's like one of the interesting inscriptions, which define the common enemy as the West. We can see like Yankees, Anglo-Saxons, Jews, and Eurogays, whatever that means, as the enemies that the Russian military are fighting against, and it is written on the British flag that they found in a school, obviously, like in some English class or a geography class. And they just defined this flag with these common enemies they are fighting against. Here is another example as like the West is the common enemy the Russian military thinking they are fighting against because Ukraine, why do you need NATO? Is like the rhetorical question the Russians keep asking on the walls and also in some propaganda messages. And here's another example of the intentionality of the Russian military, where you can see the Ukrainian map, the map of the world with Ukraine just painted over in the color of Russia in order to for it to become part of the Russia on this map. So it's like the symbolic occupation of Ukraine they are performing in some school of Kherson region. And here is another example of like this attitude of towards Ukrainian language. So here they are denying the existence of Ukrainian language. And the next block I will show you will be about the private homes, which are also being occupied by the Russian military and also looted and destroyed. So here you can see another interesting narrative that is being conveyed by the Russian military, which is the Rus. Rus is a medieval state that used to exist with center in Kiev. And the Russian political mythology likes to see Russia as the just as a state that continues the Rus ideology and political inheritance, because like Russia itself, like this name was adopted by the Moscow state in order to be like Rus with the same root of the word. So here, this attitude that they are Rus and therefore they can claim the territory of Ukraine is conveyed by some Russian military. Also, here is another example of how they do mark the private homes and some interesting symbols they are using with this playful attitude of the inscription. And of course, inside the private homes, we can see this attitude of capturing all the private property with no remorse. So your home is our home also is a very powerful message that is not only about this house specifically, but also about the overall occupation pattern and the attitude that is brought to other countries. Another interesting block of messages conveys the some kind of luckiness of Ukrainians. This is interesting because uh, apparently among the Russian military there was some kind of common thought that Ukraine is a very uncivilized country. And so when they came to Ukraine and seen like normal houses, cars, toilets, some civilization, they were uh, sometimes shocked because they actually seen that Ukrainians live as decent people. So sometimes they do convey this in messages inside private homes as like this one. Here is another picture actual owner of this house sent us. That's the state of the house that he found when he returned home. Glory to Great Russia is inscription he did see, but also all this mess and ruins around are also the doing of the Russian military. And moreover, he found several landmines, anti-personnel ones, that were inside his house as well. Another very big block of markings or graffitis are found on the civilian cars, which is a very common tactic among the Russian military to capture all civilian cars in the occupied zone and to use them for their own doings. So like all these cars are being marked, not to confuse them with other civilian cars that may be used by actual civilians. So lots of Ukrainian civilian cars are being seen like in this state with the marks. And also this one was not used but vandalized. So this used to be a Bentley car that the Russian military already defined as the model of a Russian car, ironically. So this kind of vandalism towards property is also common. We can also see the occupation of libraries, which is a very problematic topic. Here you can see the inscription, like "Chochol" is the slur towards Ukrainians the Russian use. And here, not only it was the inscription inside the library with the librarian's lipstick and so on, but also in these kinds of libraries, we can see the vandalism towards Ukrainian books. If the occupations last long enough, these books are being burnt or destroyed with other ways. And if the occupation lasts longer than like 6 months, usually the Russian books are being brought in these libraries instead. A very interesting topic of discussion about the graffiti of the Russian military is religion, because the religion and like the Russian Orthodox Christianity is a very big player in the Russian propaganda machine. So like, for example, "We are Russian, God's with us" is a very common message the Russians are accepting, and they are widely using like priests and church in order to for people to accept the war and the conflict and the occupation of Ukraine. So, for example, priests can just bless the military equipment and so on. That also like we can see these kinds of messages on the walls in Ukrainian houses. Or this one is very interesting. So if God is for us, who is against us is an actual Bible quotation from Romans. And here we can see this also attitude that they are being like chosen by God, or they are being supported by God. And this message is also very popular in the Russian media space. The Russian popular culture has like memes with this. They have TikToks, they have merch with this quotation. So this is a very like widespread phrase they are using in their culture. And here, like God's on your land is also very like interesting message they have left in the Chernihiv region. Here is one of the Ukrainian inscriptions, which is like much more somber, I think, because that's actually a very common thing you can see in liberated village or city in every basement. Usually, when the village is occupied, civilians have a very strict curfew. So, usually, they are allowed to leave the basements for like 1 or 2 hours per day, just to have some water and maybe some medicine. And so, in lots of villages and cities that are being liberated, there are people who spend a very long time in the basements, so they are forced to keep the calendar because they have no connection and no like connection to the real world, as well as cell phones. So they just trying to keep calendar, and also they are trying to write the names of people who are dying inside these basements, just to keep the record going. Also, the occupation of the Ukrainian settlements are usually associated with abduction of the pro-Ukrainian people. This can be like people who were fighting in this conflict, but also just like some writers, some like city administration and so on, just people who are actively pro-Ukrainian volunteers. And usually these kind of people are being kept in some either prisons or just the self-made downs like the police premises, railway stations, and torture is a very common tactic among the Russian military to use against these civilians. And one of the like techniques that the eyewitnesses and people who were kept there are reporting that like this inscription that you are seeing, like glory to Russia, glory to Putin, glory to Shoigu, Shoigu being like the commander-in-chief of the Russian army. So the Ukrainians were forced to like scream these words every time they go out from their cells. Here is like another interesting poetry piece that was found, like obviously courtesy of some Russian military guys. So here we also can return to this common Western enemy, who here is about Biden and Macron. So here we can see also this like attitude of the Russian military, were not even Ukrainians, but just the very abstract enemy is being used. Here's also one of these like more poetic examples of the Russian graffiti. So here, like, we will rise in the city of on the ruins of cities and write your names in the book of the dead. Is the quote that sometimes is being associated with the Wagner group. The Wagner was a very big force of the Russian military back when its leader was alive and active. And here, like this dark poetic messages of this private military group that was that just consisted of usually the prisoners or former prisoners is very situant of these kinds of groups. And this will be the final inscription I will show you today. And it's actually from the same bar that this first inscription is about. It ain't a war crime if you had fun. And the other inscription that was left by some colleague of the first author says, like, there are two questions, answer on any questions about Ukraine. First, it didn't happen, and second, they deserve it. Both are correct. And here is like this message that I, as Ukrainian, find terrifying, to be honest. And I really hope that there will be some consensus in the world and inside Ukraine not to make this inscription real, and just to stop this kind of attitude. Because in 2024 and 21st century, it cannot be happening, especially in the center of Europe. So there are like obviously more of these inscriptions, and there are currently more than 600 of them. Lots of them are online on our website that you can see, and we also have an Instagram where we actively try to research and explain some of these messages and to find some roots and some sources of them. So if you are interested in this topic, please follow us and take a look in the archive. And I thank you for your attention. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Roxolana, for an incredible talk. I know that this is a difficult topic, and so we're grateful that you were willing to be with us, and we're proud to present you. As Roxolana mentioned, you can go to their website, and if you're not able to download this at the moment, we also have this information on our website. It's archaeologynow.org, and there's a pop-up that'll stay on there for a few days, still announcing the event, but it takes you to the page, to the event page, and there is a link to the project. So, couple of questions, couple of thoughts, and thank you all so much for the comments that you posted while this was going on. One of the things that I'm wondering is, physically, how are you all documenting this? Are you traveling place to place? Is that dangerous? I mean, how did you start documenting? Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So at first, we were documenting the Kiev region, which was relatively easy because we were going around the area and we did document lots of picture by ourselves. Then we have lots of colleagues, like for example in Kharkiv region, who are documenting as well with like our cultural heritage initiative, and they are documenting stuff for us. Uh, then we started to look into some open sources and seen lots of like journalists, for example, who were traveling to the liberated territories, and we started to contact these journalists in order to gather it. And then at some point where the large chunk of these Ukrainian territories were liberated, we started to contact the locals who were like willing to erase these graffitis from their homes and walls, of course, but usually they were taking pictures of them. And so we started to ask just to share these pictures with us. And it was quite effective because people are willing to share their stories. It's no use for us to go there in every territory that was liberated, because these graffitis are usually the first thing that disappears, because like people are willing to erase these hateful messages. By the time it's safe for civilians to go there, we usually can lose lots of materials.
Mhm.
So right now that works like this.
Do you think that the graffiti that you're seeing is more an attitude of individuals, or do you think that there's also some military organization and policy behind it? Because obviously it's intimidating, it's demoralizing. So do you think that there's any policy about whenever we hit an area, let's, organize, there's some organization from commanders, what do you think is happening there?
Well, I think there are both of them, honestly. Well, if we are talking about like these graffitis that are trying to organize space somehow,
Mhm,
uh, this is more of the military, like organization, because like the commanders say like we are occupying this, and this, and we are blocking this road. So like this kind of like more technical messages, they are very meaningful towards like in the context of the city, but also like more technical. They are being like throughout all the territories, but then like more private messages inside homes, in the interiors usually, they are, I think, more um, private, but also they often lead to some source in the Russian popular culture, usually. So these are songs, memes, literature sometimes, and so on.
do you think do you think it's possible to ever identify who has done it?
Well, of course, not in every instance, but there were actually some instances where the investigators did identify the authors of these messages, because some of them can share their names or their social media handles, for
Mhm,
example. And by this, like for example, some people who were participating in Bucha massacre were identified. Uh,
mhm.
so they often just identify themselves as well, and it's also one of the reasons we are gathering this, because we are hoping to identify some of the perpetrators.
Well, okay, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of the things I wonder too is ultimately, what are your plans for this work? How do you hope to bring justice? Are you working with any international groups, like anybody in The Hague or?
we do work with some international groups, and we found that it's a very useful material. Uh, Not only with identifying, we like have several hypotheses how this can work for justice. So one of them being the um, um, establishment of intent, because it is a
Mhm.
very like hard topic to prove, you know, the intent of actually committing, for example, like some international crimes. And here we can like see this intent in some messages. So then we do have, of course, this identifying part of it. We also have this like um, hate speech towards Ukrainians, which is very important to capture, because this dehumanization of Ukrainians is a
Mhm.
very important part of how this conflict works for Russians. And yeah, of course, like some even some graffitis that just are inside some civilian infrastructure are incriminating enough, because if there are some neutral Russian, even neutral Russian graffiti inside the school or civilian homes, it identifies the breach of international humanitarian law, because you cannot just invade the school, you cannot just invade someone's house. It's
Right,
illegal. You
right.
cannot.
And today, now it seems like we're seeing norms trampled so much. Geneva Convention, forget it. It's, we're seeing cultural sites destroyed, civilian sites destroyed and invaded and destroyed. And one of the other things that you mentioned that really captured my interest was talk about Christianity seemingly being involved. And of course, we've heard talk about how Orthodoxy is involved in Russia and support. And so, um, are do you think that organized religion is participating in the creation of graffiti? Are priests traveling with units and participating in this, or how do you think that? Because this is certainly providing justification for those who are doing it.
Mhm. Well, I'm not sure about like priests. Well, there is like tradition of like military priests being like involved in the military units, but also I know that the Russians are organizing like some tours of some famous or influential figures traveling to the front line to like for example, lots of Russian artists are traveling to the front line to just like give concerts to the Russian military. Or like I suspect that priests are also can be traveling to like bless the Russians to go to this war. But this is only like my suspicion
Mhm.
based on what I know about the artists, because like I know for sure that artists are doing this.
What do you think? What do you think graffiti says about the attitudes in the homeland? Because how many people do you think are caught up in this unsuspectingly, and then become educated once they are in the conflict? Um, how much of it just depicts attitudes from the homeland, or how much of it depicts attitudes of a military force? Is there a difference, or is it fused?
Mhm. So I can tell for sure that over time, through graffiti, we can see the change of the attitudes. So as I mentioned before, at first stage of war was a bit like confusing for lots of the Russian like military who came to Ukraine. But then like of course 2 years in, uh, in Russia, people know what's happening, you know. Like, of course, there are like fears of mobilization, and like lots of people do not want to go to the war, for example, escape to other countries to escape the mobilization, for instance. But also, we can see that the more this war continues, the more like overtly aggressive messages are discovered. So like if at first we have seen like lots of messages we didn't know, we were forced and so on, like the more time passes, the more like these graffiti become just um, very pro-Russian patriotic or just aggressive, you know,
Mhm.
because at this point there is no way you do not know where it's going.
Right. Oh my heavens. Well, I think that your work is so important.
Thanks.
We're proud to present you. And please stay in touch with us. For everybody that's here today and for those who signed up, this talk is going to be placed on Vimeo because there is a greater chance that through Vimeo, this will be placed more accessible to people around the world. So we will be sending a link to everyone that registered today, and then we will also place a link on our website for the Vimeo presentation, and we wish you the very best. Um, so, like I said, keep in touch. We'd love to hear what's happening, and we'd love to follow. And perhaps what we can do is continue to put messages on our website on this page. So, um, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much.
Bye bye.